In the middle of a blizzard, a retired Navy SEAL stopped when his dog froze in the snow. Beneath the wind and ice, he saw an elderly woman barely breathing, trapped between life and death. He could have kept walking. No one would have blamed him. But something stronger than fear told him to stay, to lift her, to fight the storm. What he didn't know was that this woman was the mother of a feared biker boss, and saving her would force a reckoning no one saw coming. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Winter tightens its grip on Spokane, snow stains the streets gray, sirens echo between buildings, and a storm grows beyond forecasts, quietly, patiently, waiting to fall. Victor Hale had always believed cities made sense at night. Lines were clearer in the dark. Enemies announced themselves with engines and gunfire, and loyalty was easier to measure when fear stripped away the polite lies of daylight. Tonight, the city betrayed that belief. He moved through an abandoned warehouse district near the river, boots crunching over dirty snow, breath shallow but controlled. The cold didn't bother him. It never had. What gnawed at him was the unfamiliar pressure behind his ribs, tight, persistent, unignorable. It wasn't panic. Victor Hale didn't panic. It was something worse. It was care. A burst of headlights sliced through a gap in the corrugated metal walls. Victor froze, counting seconds, listening. Engines. Too many. He recognized the sound, low, aggressive, tuned for intimidation rather than speed. Another club, another betrayal, another line crossed. He pressed his back to a rusted container and closed his eyes for a heartbeat. Not to pray. He had stopped doing that years ago. He closed them because he needed to think of one face, one voice, one reason not to make a mistake. His mother. The phone vibrated in his hand, as if summoned by the thought. A name flashed, one of his most trusted men. Victor answered without speaking. "Where are they?" he asked. "Everywhere," came the reply. "They're pushing hard. Downtown's compromised." Victor exhaled slowly. "My mother?" "Already moving her out of the city, like you said." Good. That word echoed longer than it should have. Good meant safe. Good meant distance from this mess. Good meant she wouldn't see what he was about to do. He ended the call and leaned his head back against the cold metal. For years, Victor Hale had built his life on motion. Ride forward, never stop, never look back. Tonight, every instinct told him to turn around, to get in a car, to follow his mother's convoy until the city lights vanished and all that remained was quiet. But quiet had never belonged to him. He glanced toward a flickering television mounted high on a warehouse wall, the screen miraculously still alive. A local news channel scrolled warnings beneath a weather map, stained deep blue and white. Major winter system approaching, heavy snowfall, high winds, risk of avalanches in suburban and hillside areas. Avalanches. The word slid through his mind without catching. His world collapsed from bullets and betrayal, not snow. Nature was a background problem, unpredictable, inconvenient, but rarely personal. He turned away as headlights swept closer. Victor ran. He cut through alleys and loading docks, the city revealing its skeleton, pipes, ladders, half-buried doors, to nowhere. He had learned long ago that survival was about momentum. You didn't need to be faster than everyone else. You only needed to know where not to stop. A shot cracked the night, then another. Concrete chipped near his shoulder. He didn't flinch. Flinching wasted time. As he ran, memories surfaced uninvited. His mother standing in the kitchen years ago, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold, telling him, quietly, that every road eventually demanded payment. He had laughed then, said he'd built roads of his own. He wasn't laughing now. Victor ducked into a service stairwell and locked the door behind him, chest rising faster than he liked. He pulled out his phone again, thumb hovering. He should call her. Tell her to stay inside. Tell her not to move. Tell her. The signal wavered. He tried anyway. The line rang twice before connecting, the sound distorted by wind. "Ma," he said, the word rough in his mouth. "Listen to me. You need to stay where you are. Do not leave the house. Not for anything." Her voice came through thin but steady, too steady. "Victor," she said, and he could hear the disappointment woven gently into his name. "You don't sound like yourself." "I don't have time for this," he snapped, then softened his tone by force. "There's trouble. I can handle it. You just stay put." A pause, long enough for dread to seep in. "There's something wrong with this storm," she said. "It's not like the others." Victor clenched his jaw. "It's snow. You've lived through worse." "Not this kind," she replied. "The air feels heavy, like before an accident." He closed his eyes. This was the problem. She had instincts, old, inconvenient instincts that had been right more often than he cared to admit. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" she asked gently. "Or are you the one pretending?" He heard wind howl through the receiver, sharp and rising. The signal dipped again. "Promise me you won't go anywhere," Victor said. It came out harsher than he intended, edged with fear he couldn't mask. "I promise to be careful," she answered. "That's all I can promise." "Ma—" The line went dead. Victor stared at the phone, heart thudding. He tried again. No signal, just static and silence. For the first time that night, he felt truly exposed. He slid down the stairwell wall and sat heavily on the concrete step, head in his hands. The city noise faded, replaced by the rush of blood in his ears. He thought of all the deals he'd made, all the threats he'd survived, all the times he'd trusted force over faith. None of it mattered if he lost her. None of it had ever mattered as much as he'd pretended. Footsteps echoed above, voices close. Victor stood, anger replacing fear with familiar efficiency. He checked his weapon, adjusted his grip, and set his face into the expression that had kept him alive this long. Whatever happened next, he would keep them busy. He would draw the fire. He would make sure their attention stayed on him and not on a quiet road leading out of the city. As he pushed the stairwell door open and stepped back into the snow, a single thought anchored him. Heavy, unshakable. Just survive tonight. Let her survive the storm. Behind him, the city surged forward, hungry and loud. Somewhere beyond its reach, winter gathered its strength, indifferent to guns and names alike. Victor Hale moved into the darkness, unaware that the storm he feared least was already closing in on everything he loved. Snow thickens over Spokane Valley as wind rises without rhythm. Power lines hum uneasily, and the road leading out of the city disappears into white uncertainty. The silence after the call ended felt heavier than the gunfire Victor Hale had just outrun. He stood in the stairwell for a few seconds longer than necessary, phone clenched in his hand, staring at a screen that refused to reconnect. He told himself the line had dropped because of interference, because storms did that, because nothing truly bad ever announced itself cleanly. Yet the unease did not fade. It settled deeper, pressing against old instincts he had spent decades training himself to ignore. Victor moved again, not because he had a plan, but because standing still felt like surrender. Above him, engines roared closer, voices echoing with the confidence of hunters who believed time was on their side. Victor slipped out through a service exit, circled wide, and vanished into the tangle of half-lit streets, carrying with him the image of his mother's calm defiance, and the words she had not said, but meant clearly enough. Some dangers could not be ordered away. Miles from the city center, beyond the reach of neon and sirens, the road narrowed and rose toward the outskirts where trees leaned inward, like witnesses. Victor's mother drove alone now. The men who had escorted her earlier had peeled away as instructed, unwilling to draw attention, unwilling to be followed into quiet places. She welcomed the solitude. Silence let her listen, and what she heard unsettled her. The wind did not merely blow, it pulled, as if testing the ground. Snow fell not in flakes, but in sheets, flattening the world and erasing edges she knew by heart. She slowed, hand steady on the wheel, mind drifting backward to other moments when the air had felt wrong. Years earlier, before Victor had hardened into the man he became, she had felt this same weight in the hours before a highway accident that took a neighbor's life. Instinct was not fear. Instinct was memory speaking through the body. The road curved sharply, shadowed by a rising slope thick with snow-laden trees. She considered turning back, then dismissed the thought. Going back meant the city, and the city meant her son's war. A sudden gust shoved the car sideways. Tires lost their argument with the road. There was no time for panic, only the brief, detached clarity of someone recognizing inevitability. The car slid, struck hard, and stopped at an angle that made breathing feel expensive. Pain radiated through her chest and shoulder, not sharp enough to scream, not dull enough to ignore. The engine sputtered once and died. Snow rushed in through a cracked window, cold, immediate, and invasive. She fumbled for the phone, but the signal that had already failed her son had nothing left to give her. Somewhere in the dark, metal settled, and the slope above her groaned, shifting its weight. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to think of Victor as a boy, stubborn and bright, refusing help even when he needed it most. She wondered if he had learned that from her. At the same hour, on a different stretch of road, Jack Miller walked with his dog, Rex, moving at a pace shaped by habit rather than destination. Retirement had stripped Jack of structure, but not vigilance. Winter nights still pulled him outside, still demanded his attention, as if the cold itself were an old commander issuing silent orders. Rex stayed close, alert in the way that came not from training alone, but from shared history, from long nights where survival had depended on reading what humans could not see. Jack did not think of himself as a hero anymore. That word belonged to younger men, and to memories he had packed away with medals and folded flags. He thought of himself as someone who kept going. That had been enough after the accident, enough after the hospital room where machines spoke more faithfully than he could, enough after the house went quiet, in a way no battlefield ever had. The wind shifted. Rex stopped, not abruptly, not theatrically, but with the certainty that always tightened Jack's spine. The dog's focus narrowed, attention drawn upslope, ears tuned to something buried beneath the storm's noise. Jack followed the gaze, senses sharpening, the old mental checklist flickering to life without conscious invitation. He smelled coolant before he saw the car, a faint chemical bite under the snow's clean lie. The vehicle sat wrong, nose down, rear lifted, as if the road had rejected it. Jack approached carefully, speaking low, more to steady himself than to reassure anyone else. Inside, he found the woman. Her eyes were closed, breath shallow but present, each exhale a fragile victory against the cold. He assessed injuries quickly, hands moving with practiced restraint, mind calculating margins. The slope above them creaked again, a sound that tightened the window of options. Staying meant waiting for help that might not come. Moving meant risking everything. Rex shifted closer, body angled toward the road as if already choosing a path. Jack felt the old argument rise in him, the one that had never truly left. You cannot save everyone. You cannot undo what is already done. He thought of his wife's last morning, of the way certainty had felt then too, only to be proven false. He swallowed, not in fear, but in resolve. The storm did not care who he was or what he had lost. It would take what it could. Jack refused to make it easy. He wrapped the woman as best he could, lifting her with care born from respect rather than strength, adjusting when pain flickered across her face. Rex moved ahead, pausing, checking, waiting, not anxious, but intent, a partner rather than a tool. As Jack stepped away from the car, snow shifted behind them, a low rumble rolling through the dark. he did not look back. Some lessons, once learned, did not require repetition. Far away, Victor Hale ducked into another alley, breath burning now, thoughts narrowing to a single, unbearable question he could not yet ask aloud. He did not know that his mother was alive, did not know she was being carried by a stranger who owed him nothing, did not know that a dog with no stake in human wars had already chosen a side. He only knew that something had gone wrong beyond his control, and that the storm he had dismissed was beginning to claim its due. Jack moved uphill, step by deliberate step, Rex steady before him, the woman's weight real and urgent in his arms, as the wind howled louder, as if objecting to his decision, and somewhere beneath the snow the mountain listened, waiting to see who would endure. The storm thickens into a living wall outside Spokane Valley. Wind claws at the trees, snow smothers sound, and the hillside above the road shifts like a patient predator deciding when to strike. Jack Miller had carried men before, and the memory of that fact arrived with a bitter taste. In those other nights, the weight had been wrapped in uniforms and orders and a chain of command that told him where to go and why. Tonight, there was only a stranger's frail warmth against his chest and the blunt truth that the cold would not negotiate. He adjusted his grip, feeling the woman's breath flutter against his jacket like a moth refusing to die, and he forced his mind into the old shape it understood: assess, decide, move. Rex stayed ahead by a few paces, pausing just long enough to confirm Jack was following, then pushing forward again into the white. Jack watched the dog's movements the way he used to watch a compass needle, trusting the quiet certainty more than his own eyes. The storm made vision dishonest. It made distance look like safety, and safety look like emptiness. But Rex moved as if the world still had edges, as if there were a path hidden under the chaos. Jack envied that. People like to call it instinct when it belonged to animals, as though instinct were some simple magic. Jack knew better. Instinct was the sum of every close call that had not quite killed you. Rex had his own collection of those, stacked behind his eyes, and tonight those memories were speaking louder than the wind. Jack took one step, then another, feeling the snow give under his boots in a way that made his stomach tighten. The slope above them groaned again, the sound low and distant, yet intimate enough to raise the hair on his neck. He did not look up for long. Staring at danger never made it smaller. Instead, he focused on the woman's face, pale under a crust of wind-driven snow. Her eyelids fluttered once, then settled. "Hey," he said, voice low, steady. He was not sure if she could hear him. He spoke anyway. "Stay with me." It wasn't a plea, it wasn't kindness. It was a command, the same kind he used on himself when his body wanted to quit. Rex glanced back as if listening, then angled slightly left, away from the road's deepest drift. Jack followed. Every few steps his calf muscles burned and his breath came too sharp, and he fought the urge to measure the distance remaining, because distance was a liar in weather like this. Better to measure time, better to measure the next 10 steps. He felt the woman shift in his arms and heard a faint sound that might have been a name trying to become a word. Jack leaned closer. "What did you say?" Her lips moved again. "Vic," she whispered, so quiet it almost vanished. The word landed in Jack like a small stone dropped into deep water. Victor, he assumed. A son, a person waiting somewhere, unaware. The thought should have stayed neutral, but it didn't. It sparked an old anger Jack had never fully disarmed, the anger toward fate, toward randomness, toward the cruel arithmetic of what the universe took and what it left behind. He tightened his hold, careful not to hurt her. "He's not here," Jack said, then hated himself for the bluntness. He softened it, forcing gentleness into his tone, like a soldier forcing a smile in a place that didn't deserve one. "But you're not alone right now. You've got me." Her breathing hit-teased, just slightly, as if the body understood reassurance even when the mind could not. Jack felt his throat tighten. He kept moving. The storm shoved at him, trying to turn him around, trying to make him choose the easier option. Put the woman down, find shelter, save yourself, call it practical, call it inevitable. That voice sounded reasonable, which made it dangerous. Jack had heard that voice on battlefields too, disguised as logic. He remembered another night, years ago, when he had carried someone through smoke and noise and had believed, for a few fierce minutes, that effort alone could rewrite outcomes. The belief had been intoxicating. Then reality had reminded him of its rules. He had survived and someone else hadn't, and the world had kept turning as if the difference meant nothing. That was the kind of lesson a person could either accept or spend the rest of their life arguing with. Jack had spent years arguing, quietly, stubbornly, like a man trying to hold back the tide with his hands. When his wife died in that crash, the argument had turned into silence. He stopped expecting the universe to be fair. He stopped expecting himself to be enough. He started expecting loss. That expectation had kept him from falling apart, but it had also kept him from living. Tonight, the expectation was trying to reclaim him. It whispered that this woman was already gone, that he was only delaying the inevitable, that he was no savior, just a tired man in an old jacket, clinging to a fantasy of redemption. Jack gritted his teeth and took another step. If the storm wanted him to quit, it would have to do better than words. Rex stopped again, head tilted, listening. Jack froze, holding his breath. The wind roared, then dipped for a second, and in that brief lull, Jack heard it. A deep, spreading crack somewhere above, like a giant tree splitting. Rex's ears flattened, not in fear but in focus, and the dog turned sharply, moving faster now, choosing a route that angled away from the slope. Jack's pulse spiked. He did not think. He obeyed. Training had taught him that hesitation killed, and if there was one thing he still did well, it was moving when time stopped giving permission. He pushed forward through thicker snow, legs dragging, lungs burning. The woman stirred, a small gasp, and Jack felt a flare of guilt that he had dragged her into motion without explanation, as though her life were a package to be delivered. He bent his head near her ear. "We're moving because we have to," he said, as if she could argue, as if he needed her agreement. "Just hold on." Her fingers twitched against his sleeve, then went still. Jack wondered what she had believed in when she was young. People always carried some private religion, even if they didn't name it. Maybe hers was family. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the simple faith that if you loved someone enough, you could keep them safe. Jack understood that religion. He had practiced it once. It had failed him. He felt bitterness rise, then tasted something else underneath it, fear, raw and sharp. Not fear of dying, but fear of failing again, fear of standing in another sterile room one day, hearing another flatline, feeling that same hollow certainty that he had arrived too late. He hated how much he cared. He hated how quickly caring turned into a blade. Rex surged ahead, then stopped and looked back, as if checking whether Jack was still capable of following. Jack almost laughed, a short, harsh sound that the wind tore away. He recognized the look. He had seen it in teammates, in men who could not speak freely, but could still communicate everything with a glance. Keep up, or you'll be the one left behind. Rex was not human, but the message was the same. Jack nodded once, as if accepting an order. The terrain dipped, the snow packed tighter, and Jack's footing improved just enough to make him feel the illusion of control. The crack above them widened into a rumble, low at first, then swelling. Jack's stomach dropped. He did not need to see the avalanche to know it had begun. The sound was the mountain exhaling. Rex barked once, sharp, urgent, then ran, leading Jack toward a line of trees that stood like dark pillars in the storm. Jack ran as well, or something close to running, legs punching through drifts, arms straining to keep the woman stable. The rumble grew louder, swallowing the wind, turning the night into a single relentless sound. Jack could feel vibrations in the ground, could feel the slope's weight shifting toward them. He pushed harder, every muscle screaming. The woman's breath hitched. Jack whispered, "Stay," again and again, not sure if he was speaking to her or to himself. He reached the trees as the roar peaked, and instinct forced him behind the thickest trunk he could find. He turned his body sideways, shielding the woman with his own, pressing her against the bark, feeling his shoulders slam hard as he braced. Rex pressed close, not cowering, just present, choosing to be exactly where Jack was. The avalanche hit the open stretch behind them, a tide of snow and debris surging down, throwing a fine spray into the air that stung Jack's face like sand. He held still, breath locked, mind narrowed to one thought: endure. The roaring passed, leaving a strange quiet that made the world feel newly empty. Jack waited a few seconds longer, listening for a second wave. Rex lifted his head, sniffed, then relaxed just enough to tell Jack the immediate danger had moved on. Jack's legs shook. He loosened his grip slightly and looked down at the woman's face. Her eyes opened a sliver. For a moment, Jack saw awareness flicker there, a spark refusing to go out. Her mouth moved. "Victor," she whispered again. And this time Jack heard more than a name. He heard a longing, an unfinished sentence, a lifetime of worry condensed into one syllable. Jack swallowed the sudden ache in his throat. "We'll get you to him," Jack said. And the promise surprised him with how easily it left his mouth. He didn't know Victor. He didn't know what kind of son waited on the other end of that name, but Jack knew the hunger in her voice. He knew what it meant to want one last certainty before the world went dark. He shifted his stance, felt pain flare in his shoulder, and accepted it as a payment. Rex nudged Jack's knee, impatient now, as if to say the storm would not pause for sentiment. Jack took a breath that tasted like ice and metal, and something stubbornly hopeful. Then he stepped out from the trees, the avalanche's fresh scar behind him, the night still raging ahead, and Rex moved forward into the white, leading them toward whatever counted as shelter in a world that had decided to test every promise a man dared to make. The only comfort was that somewhere, unseen beyond the storm, lights existed, and roads existed, and people existed, and if Jack could keep walking long enough, one of those things might become real before the cold claimed its victory. Night tightens around the hills beyond Spokane Valley. The storm presses closer, the temperature drops without mercy, and the path ahead narrows into a white corridor where distance and direction lose their meaning. Jack Miller kept moving, because stopping invited questions he could not afford to answer. His legs burned in a deep, familiar way, the kind that did not ask permission, but demanded obedience. The avalanche's echo still lingered in his ears, not as sound anymore, but as pressure, a reminder that the mountain had noticed him and decided for now to let him pass. He shifted the woman's weight again, careful, methodical, each adjustment calculated to steal a few more minutes from the cold. Rex moved ahead, no longer pausing as often, as if the dog understood that hesitation now carried its own cost. Jack watched the line of Rex's body cut through the storm and felt something inside him align with that certainty. In war, momentum saved lives. In grief, momentum saved sanity. Tonight, momentum was all he had left. The woman's breathing wavered, shallow and uneven, and Jack found himself counting it the way he used to count steps under fire, in, out, each breath a marker that the fight was not yet lost. He spoke to her again, not because he expected answers, but because silence made room for doubt. He told her they were still moving, told her the dog knew where to go, told her the storm would not last forever. He did not say he was afraid. He did not say that fear had followed him quietly since the night his wife's car had crumpled on wet asphalt and the world had split into before and after. He had learned then that fear did not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it arrived as a calm voice suggesting rest, suggesting surrender, suggesting that effort was a kind of arrogance. Jack hated that voice. It sounded too much like reason. Rex slowed suddenly, head lifting, posture tightening, in a way Jack recognized immediately. Not danger behind them this time, but something ahead. Jack scanned the white, eyes straining until shapes resolved into suggestion rather than certainty. A structure, maybe. Or just trees clustered in a way that mimicked walls. He adjusted course anyway, trusting Rex's read over his own eyes. The wind shifted again, slicing through Jack's jacket, biting deeper, as if testing whether resolve had a temperature limit. Jack felt his fingers numb and forced them to move, clenching and unclenching against the woman's back. He thought of his hands years ago, shaking as he signed papers he did not want to read, as doctors explained statistics that sounded generous only to people who had not loved deeply. He remembered promising himself he would never carry anyone like that again, never feel that weight slipping beyond his control. Promises made in pain rarely lasted. The storm did not care about vows. The woman stirred, a small sound escaping her throat, and Jack leaned closer, his breath fogging her ear. She murmured again, the same name, Victor, threaded now with something like apology. Jack felt a flash of irritation at the invisible son who occupied so much of her remaining strength, then immediately felt ashamed of the thought. Love was not a resource to be rationed. Love burned until it went out, and sometimes it burned brighter the closer it came to extinction. He wondered, not for the first time, what kind of man Victor Hale was. The name carried weight, sharp edges. Jack imagined violence, imagined choices made and lines crossed. None of that mattered here. In Jack's arms was not a criminal's mother or a stranger's burden. She was simply a life-resisting erasure. Rex barked once, not alarmed but firm, and angled toward a darker shape half buried in snow. Jack followed, heart lifting despite himself, as the shape resolved into a small hunting cabin, long abandoned but standing, its door bowed inward by years of neglect. Shelter. Not salvation, but a pause. Jack forced the door open with his shoulder, the wood protesting, then yielding. Inside, the air was stale but blessedly still, the wind reduced to a distant howl. Jack lowered the woman carefully onto the floor, propping her against the wall, using his body as a barrier while he stripped off his outer layer and wrapped it around her. Rex circled once, then settled near the door, posture alert, not resting so much as guarding. Jack crouched, breath coming hard now, muscles trembling as the adrenaline drained. He checked the woman again, pulse faint but present, skin cold but not yet unforgiving. He allowed himself one deep breath, then another. The pause felt dangerous, like a truce that could break at any moment. The storm rattled the cabin, reminding him that this was not an ending. It was an intermission. Jack sat back on his heels and stared at his hands, flexing them slowly. They shook. He did not fight it. Shaking meant circulation, meant life pushing back. He thought of all the times he had believed he was done with carrying people, done with choosing paths that led straight through pain. He had told himself retirement was about peace. Tonight had revealed the lie in that. Peace had never been the absence of danger. Peace was knowing which dangers were worth facing. The woman's eyes opened again clearer this time, and she focused on him with surprising intensity. "You shouldn't," she said, voice thin but determined. Jack leaned closer, unsure which part of that sentence she meant. "Shouldn't what?" She swallowed, breath hitching. "You shouldn't risk yourself for someone like me." The words cut deeper than he expected. Jack felt a familiar anger rise, not at her, but at the idea itself. He shook his head. "That's not how it works," he said quietly. He did not elaborate. He did not trust himself to explain the mathematics of guilt and hope and second chances without sounding like a man trying to convince himself. She studied his face as if searching for something she could recognize, something that fit her understanding of the world. "Victor won't listen," she whispered. "He never does." Jack considered his answer carefully. He could tell her comforting lies. He could promise outcomes he could not control. Instead, he chose honesty, shaped by restraint. "He'll have to," Jack said, "if you're still here." The statement hung between them, heavy and unadorned. Rex shifted, ears flicking toward the door, sensing movement outside, perhaps just the storm-changing pitch, perhaps something else. Jack stood slowly, joints protesting, and braced the door more securely with a fallen beam. He knew they could not stay long. The cold would creep back in, patient and thorough. He would need to move again soon, back into the white, back toward whatever counted as help. He felt the weight of the decision settle on him, familiar now, almost welcome. Carrying meant choosing. Choosing meant living with consequences. Jack preferred that to waiting. He checked the woman one last time, meeting her gaze. She nodded faintly, not agreement, but acceptance. Outside, the storm surged, angry at the pause, eager to reclaim its territory. Jack placed a hand briefly on Rex's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of partnership, then lifted the woman again, muscles screaming in protest that he ignored without ceremony. As he stepped back out into the wind, the cabin door banging shut behind him, Jack felt the thin thread of hope tighten rather than snap. Somewhere beyond the storm, a hospital existed, lights cutting through the dark, machines humming, people moving with purpose. He did not know if he would reach it. He did not know what waited there, even if he did. What he knew was this: the storm had tested him and found him unwilling to quit, and the night was not finished asking its questions yet. Dawn breaks weakly over Spokane, the storm loosening its grip as hospital lights glow against dirty snow, corridors humming with restrained urgency and the promise of safety that never comes without cost. Jack Miller learned long ago that relief was a dangerous emotion. It softened edges too quickly, dulled instincts that had been sharpened by years of surviving moments that looked final until they weren't. As the hospital doors closed behind him and warm air rushed over his face, relief tried to take hold anyway. He let it pass through him without staying. The woman was rushed away on a gurney, her name still unknown to him, her hand slipping from his sleeve as medical staff took over with efficient, practiced calm. Jack stood aside, Rex planted firmly at his heel, posture tense, eyes tracking every movement, as if the dog understood that safety was provisional here. Jack watched the doors swing shut and told himself that this was the line. He had delivered her to light and heat, and people who knew what to do. Whatever happened next was out of his hands. The thought should have brought peace. Instead, it stirred a familiar unease, the same one that had haunted him after other handoffs in other places when the outcome was decided elsewhere, and all he could do was wait. He moved to a quiet corner of the emergency ward, leaning against the wall, feeling the delayed tremor in his legs as the adrenaline drained away. Rex stayed alert, not pacing, not whining, simply watching. A living reminder that vigilance did not end when the noise stopped. Jack closed his eyes for a moment and let memory flicker, uninvited. A hospital room years ago, too bright, too clean. A doctor speaking gently while meaning something brutal, the way the world could end without drama. He opened his eyes again quickly, refusing the pull. This was not that night. This was a different test. The phone vibrated in his pocket, sharp and insistent. Jack frowned. Almost no one had this number anymore. He answered without greeting. The voice on the other end was low, controlled, unfamiliar. "She's not safe yet," the voice said. Jack felt the shift instantly, a click inside his chest as something old and precise came online. "Who is this?" he asked. "Someone who knows what she means to the wrong people," the voice replied. "2 men are on their way. They won't be wearing colors. They won't look dangerous. They are." The line went dead before Jack could respond. He stood very still, eyes unfocused, letting the information settle without panic. He had been warned. That was a gift, however grim. He did not question motive. Motive mattered less than timing. He glanced down at Rex. The dog's ears had already lifted, attention sharpened, as if he too had felt the shift in the air. Jack knelt briefly, hand brushing Rex's neck in a silent exchange of trust. "Stay close," he murmured. Rex did not need the instruction. Jack moved, casual on the surface, purposeful underneath, repositioning himself near the corridor that led to the intensive care wing where the woman had been taken. He leaned against a support column, eyes half-lidded, posture relaxed enough to invite underestimation. This was a skill he remembered well. He had spent years learning how to disappear in plain sight. Time stretched. Nurses passed. A doctor glanced at him once, then looked away. Rex's body shifted subtly, weight redistributing, focus narrowing. Jack followed the line of the dog's attention and saw them then. Two men approaching from the far end of the hall, dressed plainly, moving with the practiced neutrality of people who wanted to be forgettable. They walked too evenly, scanning reflections in glass rather than looking directly ahead. Jack felt a cold certainty settle in. The men slowed as they neared the nurse's station, one of them murmuring something to the other. Rex let out a low sound, barely audible, not a growl so much as a warning that vibrated through Jack's bones. The men's eyes flicked toward the sound, assessing. Jack pushed off the column and stepped into their path, timing it so it looked accidental. "Sorry," he said mildly, stepping close enough to invade space without seeming aggressive. The first man smiled, thin and quick. "We're looking for a patient," he said. "Older woman, car accident." Jack nodded as if considering, then stepped aside just enough to let them think they had cleared the obstacle. As they moved, Rex surged forward in a sudden, controlled motion that cut off their advance, body angled, presence unmistakable. The second man cursed under his breath and reached inside his jacket. That was the mistake. Jack moved before the thought finished forming, grip locking onto the man's wrist, twisting sharply, redirecting momentum into the wall. The first man lunged, but Rex snapped into position with a bark that echoed down the corridor, forcing distance, forcing hesitation. Jack used that hesitation, driving his shoulder into the attacker's chest, pinning him hard. The fight was brief, efficient, stripped of drama. Jack did not feel anger or fear, only a cold focus that narrowed the world to angles and leverage. Within seconds, both men were on the floor, restrained, breathing hard, shock written across their faces at how quickly their plan had unraveled. Hospital security arrived almost immediately, drawn by the noise, followed closely by uniformed police. Jack stepped back, hands visible, explaining in short, precise sentences. Rex returned to his side, posture easing but attention still high, eyes tracking the men as they were cuffed and led away. As the adrenaline ebbed again, Jack felt the delayed weight of what could have happened settle on him. He pictured the woman in a hospital bed, fragile, unaware of how close danger had come even here, and felt something tighten painfully in his chest. He had delivered her once already. Tonight, he had delivered her again, this time from a quieter, more insidious threat. A police officer took his statement, nodding grimly, offering thanks that felt sincere but insufficient. Jack accepted it without comment. Praise had never been the point. He watched as the corridor returned to its usual rhythm, the hospital swallowing the incident as it swallowed so many others, reducing it to a report and a locked door. Only when things had truly calmed did Jack allow himself to sit, back against the wall, head tipped slightly forward. Rex settled beside him, close enough that Jack could feel warmth through his jacket, a grounding presence in a place that felt too clean, too fragile. He wondered who had made that call, an ally of Victor Hale, perhaps, or an enemy with a conscience. The question lingered, unanswered. What mattered was the implication. The woman's life was entangled in a world that did not end at the hospital doors. Jack looked down the corridor toward intensive care, toward the place where machines now spoke for a body too tired to argue. He thought of Victor Hale, of the name that had followed him through the storm like a ghost, and felt a new understanding settle in. Whatever choices Victor had made, whatever lines he had crossed, his mother was paying for them now. Jack did not know if Victor deserved forgiveness. He did not know if redemption was real. He only knew that trust, once placed, carried weight. Somewhere beyond the hospital walls, a man was still running, still fighting his own war. Jack exhaled slowly, accepting what the night had made clear. This was not finished. The storm outside might be fading, but another kind of reckoning was moving closer, and Jack sensed that before it ended, Victor Hale would have to choose what kind of man he was willing to be. For now, Jack stayed where he was, a quiet sentinel in a place that pretended neutrality, while Rex watched the doors with patient resolve, both of them ready for whatever question the night decided to ask next. Police lights fracture the falling snow around Spokane General Hospital as dawn struggles through cloud cover, sirens echoing across wet asphalt, while a man with nowhere left to run makes one final choice. Victor Hale ran because stopping anywhere else would have meant dying without meaning. His breath tore at his lungs as he cut through an alley behind the hospital, boots slipping on ice glazed thin as glass, the red and blue reflections chasing him like ghosts that refused to be outrun. The city had turned against him completely now. Streets he once owned had closed their mouths. Doors stayed locked. Radios crackled with his name, stripped of title, stripped of fear, reduced to a target. He had lost men in the night, lost ground, lost the illusion that power could always buy time. What he had not lost, not yet, was the image of his mother lying in a hospital bed, alive because someone else had chosen to carry her when Victor could not. The gunshot wound in his side burned with every step, a dull heat that reminded him he was still human, still bleeding, still capable of pain that had nothing to do with pride. He stumbled once, caught himself against a brick wall, and laughed under his breath at the sound of it. Years ago, laughter had come easy, sharp, and fearless. Now it came broken, edged with disbelief. He pushed forward, ignoring the shouts behind him, the command to stop, the promise of force. He did not slow. Not because he thought he could escape, but because he had one destination left that mattered. The hospital doors loomed ahead, sliding open as he burst through, trailing snow and blood onto polished floors. People shouted. Security moved. Victor raised his hands briefly, not in surrender, but in warning. "I'm not here for them," he said hoarsely, meaning the police, the system, the inevitable. "I'm here for my mother." Something in his voice cut through the chaos, not authority but desperation, and it bought him seconds. He used them. He moved down the corridor toward intensive care, guided by memory more than signage, every step echoing too loud in the sterile space. He felt the weight of eyes on his back, felt the guns trained, the decision points stacking up behind him. He did not turn. Turning would have invited negotiation, and he was done bargaining. He reached the door to her room just as hands grabbed his jacket, just as a voice barked an order, inches from his ear. "Please," Victor said, and the word surprised him with its softness. "Just 1 minute." There was a pause, brief and charged. Then the grip loosened enough for him to slip inside. The room was dim, machines murmuring with mechanical patience. His mother lay still beneath thin blankets, her face pale, but no longer ashen, chest rising and falling with measured assistance. For a moment, Victor could only stand there, stunned by the simple fact of her continued existence. He had imagined this room a dozen ways on his run, most of them ending with silence. This was better. This was unbearable. He stepped closer, ignoring the pain, and knelt beside the bed. "Ma," he said, and felt something inside him fracture cleanly. Her eyes opened slowly, focus sharpening as recognition settled in. She looked at him not with fear or accusation, but with the weary clarity of someone who had waited long enough. "You look terrible," she said, voice thin but steady. Victor laughed again, a sound that turned into a breathless cough. "You should see the other guys," he replied automatically, then winced at the old reflex. She reached for his hand, fingers cool, grip surprisingly firm. "Are you hurt?" she asked. He nodded once. "It's nothing." She tightened her grip. "It's never nothing with you." The words were gentle, but they landed harder than any blow. Victor swallowed, eyes burning. "You shouldn't have been out there," he said, anger flaring because fear needed somewhere to go. "I told you to stay put." She held his gaze. "You don't get to command the world into being safe," she said. "You never did." He looked away, shame threading through him like wire. "I tried," he muttered. "I know," she replied, "and someone else finished what you couldn't." Victor stiffened. "The man," she continued, "the soldier, and the dog." She smiled faintly. They didn't hesitate. Victor felt the truth of that settle in his chest, heavy and undeniable. He had spent his life believing hesitation was weakness, that force was clarity. Tonight had taught him the opposite. "He saved you," Victor said. It was not a question. "Yes," she answered. "And he stayed." The word struck deeper than praise. Stayed meant responsibility. Stayed meant choosing to face consequences rather than outrun them. Victor exhaled slowly, the fight draining out of him, in a way it never had before. He squeezed her hand carefully. "I don't have much time," he said. She nodded, already knowing. "Listen to me," she said, pulling him closer with surprising strength. "Whatever you think you owe me, you don't owe it with more blood. You owe it with stopping." Victor closed his eyes. He saw the faces of men he had led, the damage he had justified, the endless forward motion that had passed for purpose. He saw, too, the quiet resolve in the eyes of a stranger who had carried her through a storm without asking her name. When he opened his eyes again, something had shifted. "You're safe," he said, more to himself than to her. "He won't leave." She nodded. "I know." Victor leaned in and pressed his forehead briefly to her hand, a gesture from a childhood he had pretended not to remember. Then he stood. When he turned, Jack Miller was in the doorway, flanked by officers who watched with weapons lowered, but ready. Their eyes met. Victor saw no judgment there, no triumph, only a steady assessment, and a line he would not cross. Victor nodded once, a wordless exchange heavy with trust. He took a step forward, raised his hands fully this time, and spoke clearly. "I'm done running." The cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, cold and final. As he was led away, he did not look back at the police or the guns or the future collapsing into certainty. He looked back once through the open door at his mother watching him with tears she did not bother to hide. She lifted her hand slightly. Victor held her gaze until the door closed. The hallway swallowed him, the sound of his footsteps fading into procedure and paperwork and consequence. Jack remained where he was, eyes on the door, Rex at his side, both of them understanding without words that this, too, was a kind of rescue. Outside, the storm finally began to thin, leaving behind a city bruised but standing, and a question that would not be answered quickly. What came after survival, when a man chose to stop running? Winter loosens its hold on Spokane as weeks pass, snow retreating from sidewalks and hospital windows, reflecting pale sunlight that feels earned rather than given. Jack Miller learned that endings rarely arrived with ceremony, that most of them slipped in quietly while people were busy breathing again. In the days after Victor Hale surrendered, the hospital returned to routine with the indifference of a place that had seen worse and would see it again. Jack visited the woman every morning at first, standing at the foot of the bed with Rex settled beside him, letting the monitors do their counting while he did his own. She healed the way people with stubborn hearts often did, inch by deliberate inch. refusing to be rushed. When she slept, Jack sat and listened to the building's low hum, surprised by how natural it felt to stay. He had not planned on attachment. Attachment happened anyway. Rex approved in the wordless way that mattered, posture easing in that room, the dog's instincts recognizing safety not as the absence of threat, but as the presence of something steady. The woman spoke little at first, conserving strength, then more as days turned into weeks, telling Jack small stories that did not need embellishment, about a boy who learned early not to ask for help, about winters that taught patience, about the cost of loving someone who never learned to stop running. Jack listened without judgment, finding in her words an echo of his own losses, shaped differently but cut from the same cloth. When she was strong enough to walk the hallway, Jack stepped back, visiting less often, allowing space to replace vigilance. He told himself that was the right thing. On the morning she was discharged, he stood with Rex by the doors, watching her leave wrapped in borrowed warmth, a nurse at her side. She stopped, took his hands, and held them longer than necessary. "You stayed?" she said simply. Jack nodded, unable to argue. He did not say goodbye as if it were final. He did not know how to make that kind of promise anymore. Time did what it always did, moved forward regardless of anyone's readiness. Jack returned to his routines, to walks shaped by habit and quiet, to nights where the cold no longer felt like an adversary, but a reminder. Once a year, without fail, he drove out to the edge of town where the woman lived now, a place with trees that whispered rather than threatened. He brought nothing elaborate, just himself and Rex, and they drank coffee that tasted like it had been waiting for company. They spoke of small things, then larger ones, then fell into a silence that felt earned. She asked about his wife once, carefully. Jack answered, carefully back, discovering that memory hurt less when shared with someone who understood what it meant to lose without spectacle. They did not speak Victor's name often. When they did, it was with the calm of people who accepted that some choices took longer to resolve than wounds. Years passed. The city changed the way cities do, pretending permanence while quietly reinventing itself. Jack grew older in increments that surprised him, noticing stiffness in the mornings and relief in the evenings, grateful for both. Rex slowed too, not in spirit, but in stride, choosing warmth more often, choosing closeness as if aware that time, while generous, was not infinite. Then one afternoon, long after the case had become a footnote and the headlines had found new appetites, Jack received a call he had not expected and did not hesitate to answer. He listened without interruption, nodded once, and thanked the voice on the line. He did not feel triumph. He felt readiness. On a crisp autumn evening, the woman set a kettle on the stove and waited, convinced by habit that the knock would come from a familiar rhythm. When it did, she smiled before opening the door, expecting Jack and Rex. Instead, she found her son standing there, thinner, quieter, eyes stripped of the sharpness that once passed for strength. Victor Hale did not speak immediately. He looked at her as if the world might vanish if he blinked. She reached for him without drama, pulled him into an embrace that felt less like forgiveness and more like gravity reasserting itself. He held on as if relearning balance. They stood that way until the kettle sang. Later, as they sat together, Victor spoke of prison without romance, of days measured by rules and nights measured by regret, of a moment when stopping became habit rather than surrender. He spoke of Jack Miller with respect that carried no debt, only acknowledgement. He stayed, Victor said, the word chosen carefully. His mother nodded, eyes bright. Outside, a car door closed softly. Jack stood on the walkway with Rex at his side, hearing the voices inside without straining. Rex did not move to the door. The dog understood what endings looked like when they were done right. Jack turned away, not out of retreat, but completion, feeling a lightness he had not expected. He walked home beneath trees that no longer leaned inward, the path clear, the air honest. Survival had brought him here. Choice had kept him. And somewhere behind him, a family had found its shape again, not because the world had been kind, but because the right people had stayed when leaving would have been easier. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly, disguised as a choice to stay, a hand that does not let go, a stranger who listens to a voice placed in the heart by God. In moments of chaos, when fear is loud and the world feels cruel, grace often works through ordinary people who decide to do what is right instead of what is easy. This story reminds us that God's miracles are not always about changing the storm, but about sending someone into the storm at the exact moment they are needed. In our daily lives, we may never carry someone through a blizzard, but we are given smaller chances every day to be a miracle for someone else, to show kindness, to forgive, to protect, to stay when walking away would hurt less. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from or who you are praying for right now. Subscribe to the channel if you believe stories like this matter, and if you believe that faith, love, and courage still exist in this world. May God bless you. May He protect your family, and may He place you exactly where you are needed when someone else is praying for a miracle.